Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our lunchtime seminar on how to build an overnight permit builder in a very short time. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Chris O'Connor, who's our Principal Architect at DHCCA, and I'm Philip Healy, Executive GM Client Services. It's my pleasure to bring you this lunchtime seminar today. I've worked with Chris over a number of years, but I first met Chris in about 2008 when he was part of the SharePoint evangelising team, where he later became an MVP, and Chris has been working consistently on helping people with SharePoint and variants of that in Office 365 until this present day. Chris and I have also worked on K2 projects and Nintex projects, so we've got a good background in forms and also workflow. Last year I approached Chris, having seen Outsystems a few years earlier, and said, why don't we have a look at this together? And Chris joined us late last year as our Principal Architect to help me with clients discover how we can help people move off legacy SharePoint apps to Outsystems, which is a whole inclusive platform for development. So let's move on to the next slide. We came up with a use case last week, thinking about the situation where things are changing rapidly. You can't predict these changes, but you need to be able to react and provide around them. So business, government in particular, all three layers of government are going through change at an unprecedented rate. This could be, we could be sitting here talking about a bushfire event or a weather event in Australia as well. There are many use cases where government is expected to react, and so is private industry, be they service providers, phone providers, utility providers, internet providers. Customers need services, and sometimes they haven't been thought about the day before. So as businesses, we need to be agile. We need to be able to respond in hours these days, not weeks, not months, and we need platforms to do it. And that's why we're talking here about Outsystems today. Part of the way of getting things done is to work quickly, and we've been working on projects recently where we can move faster than procurement can, quite often delivering something very quickly in days, hours, even weeks, and things that in the past would have taken quite a bit of work. Yes, there's still security matters sometimes, but sometimes you can get something going standalone and then get a minimum viable product there that fills the needs, and then add the bells and whistles in the days or weeks that follow. You can also iterate, so as you learn about how these new applications or procedures are used, you can iterate and keep releasing. Don't have to take the system down to release anymore. You just publish a new version of it. We know that we need to go to where people also want to interact with us. That's often a desktop, quite often an iPad or a tablet, but more and more often it's their own personal device of their phone. So given all of those options, we have to have a platform that will take us to the multi-channel customer. So we're going to show you something that we conceived last week as an idea, which Chris worked on Monday and produced in about 8 hours. An application which gave us a set of features for someone in the public who wants to apply. It grabs a list from a fictitious department, say, and we also go through a bit of a workflow so that we can approve or disapprove that person for travel. And then we also thought, well, we'll have another layer where the person at the barrack, that might be a policeman or an SES person or a military person, all they need is a phone, and we can give them a way of checking and validating that that can happen. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Chris, who will walk us through a little bit about the Outsystems platform, and also about how he built this in 8 hours. So Chris, over to you.
Sure, thank you, Phil. Excellent. Yes, definitely unprecedented times, and yeah, it's amazing to see the change day to day, week to week within our society, and the needs of business obviously related to that. Aside from sort of that rapidness of activity and business, we're living in a vastly more complicated and technical scenario than we used to in probably 4 to 5 years ago. Platforms such as Office 365 and Salesforce, they're now ubiquitous almost in many, many organizations, and the need to connect those systems to each other and integrate data and processes is now more and more relevant than ever before. We no longer have an organization or a business or a department that will have one system to do everything, be it HRIS for human resources or any number of ERP systems or document repositories. We need to be able to integrate those and take our core systems and our SaaS and commercial off-the-shelf tooling in red there, and do some custom bits and pieces to integrate those. And again, we need to be able to do that fairly quickly. But yeah, rapid is the name of the game. We need to be able to integrate those systems and solutions quickly and easily. We need to be able to understand user requirements and just start. That notion of get something up and going and add bells and whistles to it. I've sort of spoken to other colleagues and clients saying near enough is perfect. Let's just get something in the hands of the consumer or of the office worker, and we can start leveraging ROI then and just get going so that people can actually do the job that they need to do. The intuitive nature of some of these development tools now is fantastic in that the barrier to entry for developers and consultants is sort of lowered so that we can do more with less, as well as then the user experiences that we can deliver, be it across Android devices, iPhone devices, responsive phone and tablet devices, simply with clicking about as opposed to knowing layers of code and .NET or Xcode or whatever it might be for the different mobile platforms. The way we're able to achieve this is using low code, and click dev is sort of a new paradigm that, well, it's new to some people, but it's been around for quite a long time for some of these software toolings out in the business, out in the landscape. Outsystems is the one that we're focusing on today, but it's interesting to see in the marketplace, even companies such as Amazon, AWS are bringing out I think it was called Honeycode, is a new beta tool for dragging and dropping and empowering and enabling business users. That's a brand new tool, but Outsystems has been around for close to 20 years now. It was 2001 when it was first established in Portugal. But the Gartner Magic Quadrant saying that 65%, that's basically 2/3 of all software development will include some form of low code by 2024. So that's only 4 to 5 years away. That's not long at all. And I think it's probably going to be even more rapid now that needing to respond quickly to current pandemic climates. So Outsystems as a platform, as a tool, is not just a programming tool. It's not just a web design tool or visual drag and drop tool. It has great integration capabilities into modern standards and industry standards of REST and SOAP, and using JSON data, so the technical terms for some of the configuration. There's a designer in there for laying out those screens, those user interfaces, and business logic as well as then instrumenting processes and setting up flows and approvals and the like. And of course, then there's a data modeler as well. Outsystems can allow you to set up your own entities and relationships between those stored away in a back-end database. And that's great to be able to build out a solution, but then we also need to be able to run it. We also need to be able to maintain it, monitor, and provide for IT and infrastructure guys to manage the platform. So Outsystems is not just a tool to create software, but it's a platform to run and govern software. So you might have heard the term DevOps, which is moving between environments, moving code from development to staging and QA and production, and CI/CD for continuous integration and continuous deployment, so that as we test and release code, it can be deployed and be available. There's a whole pipeline within Outsystems, which can also be integrated to the Azure DevOps pipeline if needs be, and allows for user feedback as well. So a user can circle an area on a screen and say, there's a spelling mistake, and a developer can actually click on that feedback and go straight to the screen where that was to make that edit. I haven't seen that in any database or software tool to date. And yeah, some wonderful experiences that we can produce. We can do modules for just a service for, you know, essentially background code or background function, as well as then web and mobile responsive design and the like. So I can actually show you, that's the plan of today, is to go through and have a look at a scenario that I've produced. And as Phil relayed, the use case that we sort of drew up together ourselves was to think about the queues of cars moving over the border between Victoria and New South Wales with the border lockdown. Again, unprecedented times, locking the border, hasn't happened in, I think it was 40 years or something like that, and needing to allow traffic across from Albury to Wodonga and vice versa. So that notion of quick, we need an app, we need to be able to allow people to request a permit and have those vetted, as opposed to just arrive at the border checkpoint and show your driver's license and talk to the traffic officer and explain why you need to travel across the border. So this was our idea. We wanted to do something that was relevant and meaningful and quick, and I gave myself 8 hours to do it. So Monday, as Phil mentioned, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. I worked on this, and then I downed tools, and this is what I'm going to show you. So I guess you could think about this as an overnight permit builder. The government legislation lockdown happens from midnight tonight, and by 8 a.m. we've got a tool that we can put into the hands of consumers and enterprise employees working from home. So just quickly then, the technical elements of it, I've got a mobile phone app that I'll show you that's requesting a permit for travel, and that gets added to a SharePoint list. So we've got Outsystems and an integration to SharePoint that registers a permit, a SharePoint list item. I'm also then using Microsoft Flow and Power Automate as part of Office 365 to send out an approval for that travel request. That'll come to a mobile phone as an email or using the Flow Power Automate app. And then it will then notify the person who has actually requested for that permit that they are free to go, get in your car, drive to the border, you're right to go. And that's, I suppose, where one party ends. And the next party is that is a police officer or security professional on the border who is wanting to check those permits and allow people across the border. So you'll see those two screens I've got here, and we'll see this shortly, is we've got a request, and then the response shows a barcode. And then in the lower part here, the safety officer, traffic officer will use their phone to scan that barcode, and it'll tell them whether they're okay to proceed or not. So let's go and have a look at what I've put in place, and we can discuss it afterwards if there's any Q&A. All right, so I have my mobile phone in hand here, and I'm going to project my screen onto my laptop so that I can actually show you what my phone is seeing. So I use this tool called Air Server, which is great for this sort of demonstration purposes. And here we go, Air Server. So there's my desk, my keyboard. And if I was to scan on that barcode now, this is just a simple barcode that I've put on the page, but I'm going to fill in a travel request. So there you go, my application has been updated. I've done some minor updates this morning, and it's allowed me to fill in the details. So if I put in my first name, let's put in Jerry Seinfeld, and I'll put my email address at chrisoconnor@dhcca.com.au. Feel free to email me if you have any queries and questions after this session. Driver's license number and 33 Kramer Street in Wodonga. So this is someone on the Victorian side of the border in Vic. Postcode, I don't know what the postcodes there are, but we need to be traveled to 55 George Lane in Albury. So we're traveling from Victoria to New South Wales. The travel reason is hospital. I am a doctor. Oops, doctor. There we go. All right, submit. So what that's going to do now is add a SharePoint list item to our site, and that will have triggered off then a flow to ask someone to approve that. And you'll note that this is a the phone that I'm looking at here. This is person in the public sphere. So they are a consumer and they don't have access to any of these tools, but they have access to an app, and they've been told they've got a permit of TPR, Travel Permit Request 2020, number 17. So then I can use either my SharePoint site, and if I have a look at my SharePoint site, I should have my Jerry Seinfeld request in there, and it hasn't shown it there, but I've got a please review permit for Jerry Seinfeld. There it is there. So I've got in my SharePoint list, I've got a new list item, and I've got an email notifying me to review that. So there's my email to request approval for that. But I want to do this on a phone because I think it's more pertinent that people are actually using a mobile device and not actually at a computer. So if I was to go to Power Automate, so this is now, remembering this is someone who is within the business and wants to approve these travel requests. So if I now look at activity and approvals, this is the Flow app from Microsoft. So I've just taken my iPhone and downloaded and installed the Power Automate app. And I can view here that I want to go to 66 George Lane in hospital because I'm a doctor, respond to the request. If I click approve to that request and then confirm, I can put in any comments if I wanted to. So this is using the approval task for that that travel, for that flow rather, and has then moved that on. And you'll note that if we refresh now our list of travel request items, we'll see then that one will have an approved flag at the end of it. Approved, yes. Just there, travel approved, yes. And I will now have an email respond to me, being Chris O'Connor at DHCCA. Your request to travel has been approved. You may be requested for this information by traffic officers. Click to view the permit. And that's just simply come about by my flow. If I have a look at my flow here, when a new item is created in SharePoint, I start an approval, and then if it is approved, if yes, then I want to inform that person, Chris at DHCCA, your travel request has been approved, and a link to my Outsystems page. So now, again, I'll look at my phone because that's where someone will be receiving this email, and if I go to my mailbox for that, so again, this is Jerry Seinfeld in Consumer Land, opening up email, and we'll need to be traveling to that person, to that location. And here we go. There's the email telling me, oh, great, I can now get into my car and go to the border and drive across into New South Wales to Albury. So I click on View Permit. Now you note that's opening up a browser tab here, and it will bring up my travel request ID. I have to re-enter my email address because I was just concerned that someone could easily fake that URL. So it then checks to see, like if I put in the wrong email address, for instance, like I'll deliberately misspell it and do load permit, it'll say, it's brought up the details, but it's saying it has not been approved. So I'll refresh up my screen and put in, and these are these things that, as we were talking about with Phil earlier, you can finesse and fine tune, but to prove the concept, I will load up a permit. Please show this screen to the traffic officer. That's fantastic. So I can now get into my car and drive to the border. But what I will do now is I've got my iPad here, and I can show, and if I've got my camera turned on, I don't know if I do, I've got my camera turned on. So I've got my iPad here. And what I'm going to do then is scan. I'm going to use my iPad to scan the screen off my iPhone. So this is a bit tricky, but there's my iPhone. And if I scan this now with my iPad, there we go. My iPad is now loading up. I'm not sure if you can see that. I can't see what I'm seeing. But this is now loading up a web page.
Unfortunately, the background is making your hands look empty. Maybe turn the background off.
Oh, okay.
What you were doing there is fine. Just we couldn't see it, but we could imagine it. We could imagine it.
All right. So yeah, well, there's the screen there. And so that is now, the police officer has been able to scan that barcode on screen on a phone using an iPad, and has been able to then see a green bar, and that's really all they need to know, is that if they're allowed to progress or not, and would potentially say, okay, Mr. Seinfeld, can you show me your driver's license? And would check the driver's license number on the screen that he had, with the driver's license in the hand of the person behind the wheel of the car. So that is sort of the demo of what I've been able to achieve. Let's have a look at how I did that.
And by the way, Chris, they did disappear again into the background. So
what's that? Sorry.
The two screens disappeared into the background again. So
okay,
we might film that piece of magic again later on.
All right. Yeah, I can certainly do that, Phil. Thank you. So this is the Outsystems design tool. I'll expand this up. And here is my screen that I'm using to request a permit. Now, in order to do that, I've simply gone to the home page here and gone create a new tool, new app. So new application, and chosen to start from scratch and to build out a mobile phone app. That's what I've done, and created a a travel request, permit request screen. I've got a number of fields here that I've filled in, as you saw, and a box, and then some messages that show and hide depending on what occurs through that process. So using these widgets on the side here, I can drag and drop and configure those. And I've got a submit button here that, if I look at the function for that, it's a button on click. And my button on click runs a Outsystems code, if you will. This is what code looks like in Outsystems land. So I have an assigned task here, which is assigning all my SharePoint list item values, title, surname, email address, and such. And then I call to an API endpoint called submit travel request item. And if that responds with an ID greater than 0, then we want to show success. Thank you, you'll be notified. So if I look at that, that's actually in another module, in a SharePoint connector module. So we've got a modular approach to Outsystems. We've got my user interface, and then I've also got my back end, if you will. And here's the submit travel request function. I get an access token from Office 365 based on some settings that I've done. I've set up a client ID and client secret within Office 365 and SharePoint Online. And then I call a method called create travel request item and respond out the ID. So that create travel request item, if you could see down here, you might see create travel request item is doing a post, a HTTP post to the REST endpoint in Office 365. So quite simply, I'm just using REST against Office 365 and SharePoint. Much the same when I'm getting a travel request here. I get my access token and I do a get item, and I'm doing a HTTP get, and this time I'm getting the list and passing in the item ID that I want. Now that is used when the person has received the approval to travel, and so in their screen here, show permit, they will need to put in their email address, click a button, and then it loads up the details, and I've got a QR code based on that data and shows me the green text. There's the red text that we saw earlier. So very visual, very easy to understand and work with this tool. And you'll see here that my last piece to this is my travel permit checker. Now this is an iPad screen. This is just done as a responsive web page, so it's not actually an app as such, but it's showing on an iPad device. The other one is actually a mobile app, and I could, if I wanted to, deploy this up and generate a mobile app and have this appear in the Apple Store. So this is how something like the COVID tracker app, I could see how this could be done relatively quickly, relatively easily with some features and functions. And I don't have my credentials certificate for distributing that to Apple and Google Play Store at the moment. but I've just been using it as a PWA, which is my progressive web app. So that just shows in a browser on a device.
That really validates the use case of trying to build something overnight. Often launching in the Apple Store or the Android Store, you probably wouldn't be able to get that done, particularly if you didn't have an account set up beforehand. So we needed a use case that actually pushed something out under our control within our time frame.
So that was that reasoning for having that QR code on the web page here. So admittedly, this is just for my purposes, but there could realistically be a public-facing website for police, Vic Police, for instance, where they say to access a permit across the border, scan this barcode or click this link, and that'll show up in a web page or on a mobile device, and yeah, not need to be deployed to the store because there's lots of checks and balances that need to be checked off there. But yeah, this is now the web page version that I was showing on the iPad. Permit check. I could key in the number that that the person was showing me in front of them, saying that it was TPR number 17. Type in number 17 and hit check. If a person, for instance, had just printed an email. But if I had the barcode to scan, often, like I know, even going to Village Cinema, I just bring out my phone now and show my tickets, and they can scan that. So it's a good use case. And then it brings up the details on screen to validate and verify. We could have a registration number, license plate. The security officer could take a photo of the vehicle license plate if needed to be done, and store that away in a back-end system. But that's the key scenario that I've got here. Again, very similar UI to the phone builder, in that I don't have to learn now how to do an iPad or a web page or a phone version of a tool. It's very similar, drag and drop user interface designer. That's in my interface tab here for Outsystems. And then in Logic here, I've got my connector and any other back-end bits and pieces for listing out data from databases and the like. Data here, I don't actually have a database in this instance because I'm using SharePoint. But if I wanted to create a database, it's as simple as add an entity, and then I can map out my fields and columns. And once I've done that, I can easily drag and drop those onto a design pane and build out list details and standard CRUD screens and forms. So all this I was able to do on Monday. I sat down with a coffee at 9 a.m. with an idea of what to do. I'd thought about it over the weekend, but in all honesty, had not done anything with it. So built this out, including the SharePoint connection part, including the SharePoint list, and including the flow, which was the approval piece to it. So I think it's a great, really demonstrates the power of this tool, Outsystems. There it is in a web page. That's my debug window, and I can test that out in a browser. And the last piece was I had another page which I hadn't shown, but this could be a dashboard for internal staff. They could see how many have been approved or how many requests per hour, because they've got that data there. And if I refresh that up, it should show my Jerry Seinfeld guy in there too. And I need to log in, because this is actually an authenticated part of the solution, not an anonymous part. So again, showing the different user scenarios. There's Jerry Seinfeld visiting in Kramer Street, and it's been approved.
Now, the source of our data, Chris, could have been an Excel spreadsheet, some Access, some SQL. We chose SharePoint, but there could be any. It could be something where just a data source.
Absolutely, Phil. Yeah.
We know in government departments that there's lots of MS Access, legacy SharePoint, legacy databases. We could have used any of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And as well as being able to integrate and consume data from a back-end source, we can use Outsystems to expose a REST API. So it might be that we've got a scenario in Jira, let's say, is a task tracking system, and you might have heard the term webhook, where when something happens in that solution or Salesforce or SAP, that it would fire a request to another system. And so we can receive that here in Outsystems and do something with that, be it update data or run another process. There's an SAP scenario as well, and we've only got consumption of SAP functions here, but I don't have SAP configured on my environment at the minute. But SAP's out of the box configuration, SOAP and REST. And we haven't even touched
Oracle as well, yeah.
Yep. Any of those, anything that can talk in SOAP and REST, we can access. It's just down to authentication. We haven't even touched upon the inbuilt process builder and timers within SharePoint, but within Outsystems. But they're the 4 pillars of the tool: data, database, logic, your business logic, user interface for UI and user experience, and then processes to do things in and around that space. So that's the demo. I think I think it did a pretty good job of being able to have a tool that realistically could be used a bit quick and dirty, admittedly. And if I had another developer and we could have done 16 hours of work in an 8-hour day, it might have had a bit more finesse. But it's met the needs of our initial POC, being travel across the border. How do I stop these big traffic jams? How could I make someone's life easier? So Outsystems has really stepped up to the plate, and we've got a great solution out of it.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'll just ask if there's any questions at the moment from the audience. If you want to, there's only enough of us here so that we could handle audio questions, or feel free to push them through the chat. It's feasible that this could have been done in many platforms these days, as Chris said, but I think an Outsystems platform can be spun up in an AWS environment very quickly, and a license assigned, and you can get going in hours, not days or weeks. So
I think the a main competitor to Outsystems would be something like Power Apps for business apps, but you can't do an anonymous app for that. So I don't see any way that a anonymous permit request app could have been built in any Microsoft Stack tooling in 8 hours.
Yep. All in one place.
All in one place, and DevOps and all the rest as well, and mobile phone. In order to do that, you'd need something like Xamarin, which is a app development tool. You need a database layer where there's Azure services and the like. Yeah, I think it's compelling, definitely.
So I think, once again, though, you want it all in one place, you'd still need some DevOps for that. Yep. And here it's all in one place. So perhaps we'll go through a couple of slides. So the way that we help people is we try and understand what your needs are and then bring back to you the best solutions. So while we've demonstrated Outsystems today, if we think that a different platform suits your overall business needs, we'll probably come back and say, look, you could do this with Outsystems. We actually think that if you did it this way, you could do it, would suit your needs better. But understanding what an organisation wants to achieve immediately and perhaps down the track is very important in making the right decisions. So we often do a series of small workshops, and in our present world where people aren't in offices and you can't get a lot of people together, we don't run 4-hour workshops online. We tend to break them up into smaller pieces, run them over a few days. First one might be a couple of hours where we do an ideation workshop. We work with you, understand what you want to do, and then we're feeding back, well, have you thought of adding this? What if we did it this way? And it's quite interactive as to the way that we do it. We also keep totally keep it going back to what the business wants to achieve in the short and long term. The ability for us to be able to obviously push something out very quickly and then do more subsequent releases. You've seen that already. So we come up with a bit of a roadmap. We'll help you build your executive business case, give you the ROI, and a free, all of that we do for free. And we can usually do that on smaller things in hours to days. Bigger things might be days to maybe a week It's very quick for us to ideate. Recently, we did a proof of concept with an organisation. We found ourselves one meeting, we'd be busy for a day and a half, then we'd be waiting for them again. That was where we were sort of being gradually fed, and we were going through a number of success gates. Having said that, from first briefing, including a number of wait states, in 4 weeks, we showed working software to that organisation on something that they've been trying to solve for some time. Next slide, Chris. And so we're at question and answers. Now, in today, we can take them via audio channel if you want to switch on your mic, or if you want to chat, use the chat channel and come through to us, that's okay. Or if you want to contact Chris or I afterwards, very easy to contact through info@dhcca.com.au, or if you can remember Chris's
Chris.O'Connor
at dhcca.com.au, or you can find us also through LinkedIn, which is how many people came to this today. So we put this together for a lunchtime session. We've been on the air for 36 minutes. We've shown you what we built, how we did it.